She slammed the contract onto the marble counter so hard, the security guard flinched, and every lie they ever told her finally felt close enough to touch. The lobby hummed with that cold corporate silence meant to shrink people. But today, it only sharpened her anger. She could feel the paper edges cutting into her palm, a reminder of everything they thought she'd never read, every clause they buried, every win they stole. Her breath came steady, almost too steady, as if the truth inside her was choosing its moment to strike. Elias watched from the mezzanine like a man certain of his victory, but she didn't look away. She wanted him to see her walk in on her own terms, carrying the very thing that could burn his world down. All she had left was a question they weren't ready to hear, a spark she refused to smother. What does a woman owe a system that builds walls just tall enough to keep her quiet? How long can power hide behind its own echo before it faces the sound it feared? If justice comes wrapped in silence, who decides when it finally speaks? And when truth is a blade, who gets cut first? The guard hesitated before reaching for the contract, and the small delay felt like the whole lobby holding its breath. Mara didn't move. She wanted the weight of the moment to settle on them. Wanted every second to remind them she had crossed a line she wasn't walking back from. Her pulse thudded steady and sharp, like footsteps in a long hallway she'd been trapped in for years. She watched the guard glance up toward the mezzanine, looking for permission he didn't get, and something in her uncoiled. This place ran on fear disguised as protocol, and they counted on people freezing before they questioned it. She wasn't freezing today. She leaned forward, her voice low but steady, telling him they could stall, delay, pretend. None of it mattered anymore. The truth was already in motion, and she wasn't asking for permission to speak it. The elevator chimed, cutting through the tension like a blade skimming water, and the doors slid open with the quiet confidence of a place convinced it controlled every outcome. Mara didn't turn at first. She knew exactly who would step out. Elias moved with that same collected stride he used in courtrooms, the one that always made people feel smaller. But today it rolled off her like dust. She could feel old familiar anger rise. Not loud, not wild, but steady. The kind that grows in the cracks where dignity used to live. He greeted her with that polished voice, the one meant to disarm, but she heard the edge beneath it, the calculation. She met his gaze without hesitation, letting him see the certainty in her stance, the quiet declaration that she wasn't the woman he last tried to corner. This time she had something he couldn't spin. Carter arrived next, the echo of his footsteps carrying the arrogance of a man who believed problems dissolved when he stared at them long enough. Mara didn't give him that power. She shifted her weight, grounding herself as he circled slightly, trying to loom without touching. The contract lay on the counter, its presence louder than any of them dared to acknowledge. Carter asked her why she'd come back, his tone too casual, too amused. She didn't answer at first. She let the silence stretch, let him feel the gap between what he thought he controlled and what he actually did. Then she told him she returned because she finally understood something they never meant her to understand. She wasn't trapped by their words. They were trapped by theirs. Rena moved from her hiding place at last, unable to watch the standoff without standing in her friend's corner. She approached with quiet urgency, her footsteps soft but full of intention. The moment she reached Mara's side, a new balance settled in the room, one built not of power, but of solidarity. Mara didn't look at her, but she felt the presence, the support, the unspoken promise that she wasn't walking this path alone. Elias watched the shift, his confidence wavering for the first time. Carter crossed his arms, annoyed, but Mara focused on the contract, on the clause they thought she'd never see. The truth pulsed inside her like a heartbeat preparing for impact. And as she inhaled, she knew the next step would change everything. The conference room felt colder than the lobby, a place built for quiet intimidation. But Mira didn't slow as she stepped inside. The long glass table stretched between her and the truth she'd come to expose. She set the contract down again, softer this time, like a warning instead of a strike. Elias followed her in with the measured calm of a man convinced she couldn't possibly know enough to matter. Carter lingered by the doorway, already restless. Mara opened the pages, stopping at the clause she'd discovered in the midnight hours, the one that unraveled their entire plan. She didn't speak right away. She wanted them to feel the silence before the fall. When she finally told them what they'd overlooked, the air shifted. Slow, heavy, undeniable. They thought they held the script. They didn't see the rewrite coming. Elias leaned forward as she pointed to the clause, his expression tightening the way it does when he realizes he's underestimated the wrong person. He reached for the document as if grabbing control back, but she didn't let go, not yet. She explained what the wording actually meant, how their own language boxed them into a corner they couldn't easily escape. For the first time since she walked into the building, Elias didn't have a ready answer. His silence was sharper than any argument. Carter stepped in, trying to cut through the moment with bluster, but Mara kept speaking, her voice calm, steady, undeniable. The truth wasn't just on her side. It was written in their ink, printed on their pages, signed under their names. Rena slipped into the room quietly, but her presence broke the heavy stillness like a window cracking open. She took a place beside Mara without asking, her gaze moving from the contract to the men across the table. She asked a simple question, one they didn't want spoken aloud, about how many people this clause had harmed before Mara uncovered it. Elias shifted uncomfortably. Carter looked away. Mara felt something tighten in her chest. Not anger this time, but clarity. What she found wasn't just a loophole. It was a pattern. One built on people they assumed would never look deeper. That assumption was dying in this room, breath by breath. Elias finally tried to regain control, stringing together legal jargon like a shield, but Mara cut through it with one clean sentence. She told him his interpretation didn't matter. The clause required full disclosure, and they hadn't met it. His mouth opened and closed again, the first crack in his composure forming right in front of her. Carter paced, muttering under his breath, already calculating ways around it. But Mara knew the timing, the language, the signatures. They all pointed in the same direction. There was void, and the realization washed over them with an uncomfortable mix of disbelief and dread. The moment Carter demanded to know how she found the clause, Mara felt the shift, fear disguised as anger. She didn't give him the satisfaction of a detailed answer. Instead, she told them she read everything they expected her not to, every line they thought would keep her contained. The room fell silent again, not the silence of power, but the silence that comes when arrogance finally recognizes the consequences waiting behind it. Rena touched Mara's elbow gently, a silent reminder she wasn't standing alone. Mara gathered the contract, closing it with finality. She walked toward the door with a promise in her steps. They hadn't seen the last page of this fight. Elias caught up to her before she reached the elevators, his voice lower now, stripped of the polished edges he used like armor. He tried to sound reasonable, but there was something trembling beneath the surface, fear dressed as control. Mara didn't stop walking. She knew this tone, the one meant to pull her back into doubt. He asked her what she wanted, as if the answer could be bargained or softened. She told him she wanted the truth to matter. That was all. The echo of that sentence trailed through the hallway, louder than either of them expected. Elias stepped in front of her, blocking her path, and for a moment the air between them went still. He warned her that pushing further could ruin everything, for her, for them. But the threat sounded different now, less like power, more like panic. The elevator arrived with a soft chime, but neither of them moved toward it. Elias's face tightened as he tried to argue that her discovery was insignificant, a misunderstanding, something that could be handled internally. Mara almost laughed at the phrasing. She reminded him of every time they had dismissed her concerns, every moment they counted on her silence. His smile faltered, and she saw the truth flicker behind his eyes. He wasn't protecting the company. He was protecting himself. The realization steadied her. She pressed the elevator button again, slowly, intentionally, letting him feel the choice being made without him. Carter stormed into the hallway, his voice already raised before he reached them. He didn't bother with subtlety. He demanded the contract, demanded answers, demanded control he no longer had. Mara turned toward him, her stance rooted in calm. Rena arrived seconds later, drawn by the noise, planting herself quietly at Mara's back. Carter pointed out every possible consequence, throwing legal threats like gravel at her feet. Mara let him finish, then told him none of those consequences compared to what they'd done to people who trusted them. The words hit harder than he expected. His anger flickered, replaced by a brief, betraying uncertainty. Elias attempted to de-escalate, but Carter's frustration boiled past him. Mara watched the two men clash. Arrogance scraping against fear, denial cracking under pressure. She realized something crucial. They weren't unified. They never had been. She stepped closer and told them she wasn't asking for permission, cooperation, or compromise. She was simply giving them a chance to face the truth before someone else did. Carter fell silent first, shock numbing his expression. Elias followed, shoulders dropping a fraction as reality pressed in. For the first time, Mara felt the balance shift completely. Silence finally settled between them, thick and uneasy. Mara lifted the contract just enough for them to see the pages and told them she was taking this to the board next. Their reactions split instantly. Elias paled, Carter stiffened, and Rena exhaled with relief. Mara stepped into the elevator as its doors opened, the space filling with cool air and a sense of forward motion. Elias took one step toward her, reaching for a final argument, but nothing came out. The doors slid closed between them, ending the moment on her terms. For the first time since this battle began, Mara felt the future tilt in her favor. The boardroom doors were heavy, the kind built to make people hesitate, but Mara pushed them open without breaking stride. A dozen eyes lifted at once, curious, annoyed, unprepared. She felt the weight of their gaze but didn't slow. She placed the contract at the center of the long wooden table, letting the soft thud echo through the room. Elias and Carter trailed in seconds later, both wearing the look of men who had lost control of a story they thought they authored. Mara spoke plainly. No theatrics, no trembling. She walked them through the clause, the timeline, the pattern, the people they failed. The room grew still. The kind of stillness that comes before a crack spreads through the foundation. For the first time, the board wasn't looking at Elias or Carter for answers. They were looking at her. One of the board members asked how long she'd known. Mara answered honestly, long enough to understand what they'd hoped she wouldn't. Elias tried to interrupt, but she kept going, her voice steady, controlled, carrying years of buried frustration with a clarity he couldn't match. She laid out the exact moment their legal maneuver became a violation, how the language shifted responsibility back onto them. The board exchanged glances, confusion turning into dawning alarm. Carter stepped forward, insisting she misread it, but the board quietly asked him to sit down. Mara didn't smile, not even inside. This wasn't victory. It was exposure. Rena slipped into the room quietly, not to speak, but to witness. Mara felt the support at her back without turning. She continued, detailing the history of their silence, each fact placed gently but firmly on the table. The board leaned in, their skepticism melting into unease. Elias finally broke, claiming she was twisting the situation for leverage, but his voice cracked at the edge, and everyone heard it. Mara answered with one sentence. Their signatures were on every page. The room exhaled, a collective shift from doubt to recognition. Rena moved a step closer, as if anchoring Mara to the moment she'd fought so long to reach. The board asked for clarification, and Mara walked them through each step with calm precision. Elias tried again to sway the narrative, but his words felt thin, flimsy, stripped of authority. Carter's agitation grew, his pacing louder, until one board member told him to sit down or leave. Mara didn't flinch. She explained how many people had been affected, how long the damage had been buried under fine print. The room grew heavier with every sentence. She could feel the shift. The moment denial started collapsing under the weight of truth, and she didn't look away from it. By the time she finished, the room felt different, heavier, clearer, impossible to ignore. The board asked Mara what she wanted them to do. She hesitated only long enough to make sure her words landed. She asked for accountability, transparency, and every affected person notified. Carter opened his mouth to object, but two board members cut him off. Elias leaned back in his chair, defeated in a way he'd never let show before. Mara gathered the contract once more. Steady hands, steady breath. She told them they could decide how this ends, but the truth had already begun its climb to daylight, and she wasn't stepping aside again. The moment Mara stepped into the lobby again, she felt the shift. Whispers, glances, the kind of tension that spreads faster than facts. Rena walked beside her, phone buzzing nonstop with messages from people inside the company who had heard just enough to start asking dangerous questions. Mara didn't slow. She knew what came next wasn't going to stay contained in conference rooms or hallways. Truth has a way of leaking through cracks, especially in a building built on them. Rena asked if she was ready for this part, the part where silence breaks wide open. Mara didn't answer right away. She looked up at the mezzanine, where employees were gathering in quiet curiosity. Then she said she wasn't ready, but she was willing. And sometimes that's stronger. The first brave employee stepped forward, asking Mara directly what was happening. The question carried through the lobby like a spark searching for tinder. Mara paused, feeling the weight of a dozen held breaths behind it. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She told them something had been hidden, something that affected more people than they realized. Gasps and murmurs rippled outward. Rena watched the faces around them shift, from confusion to concern to anger. Mara didn't give details yet, only enough to let truth loosen its first stones. And once it started tumbling, there was no going back. Meanwhile, on the mezzanine, Lena watched the crowd growing below. She saw her father stride in, panic sketched into the lines around his eyes. Elias scanned the lobby, searching for control he couldn't find. Lena felt something twist inside her, not rebellion this time, but recognition. She'd heard pieces of conversations at home, whispers behind closed doors, half-truths spoken like warnings. Seeing Mara stand there now, steady against the tide, made everything click into place. Lena walked down the stairs slowly, each step a choice, each breath a quiet betrayal of the silence she'd kept for too long. Elias stepped forward, trying to regain the moment, calling for everyone to return to their stations, insisting the situation was being handled. But the tone didn't work this time. People didn't move. They looked at him the way people look at someone who's run out of places to hide. Lena descended the last steps and stood at the edge of the group, silent but visibly torn. Mara didn't argue with Elias. She simply said the truth was coming out, with or without permission. That sentence broke the room open. Employees began asking their own questions now. Loud ones, urgent ones, and Elias had no answers that could stand. As the noise swelled, Mara realized the truth was no longer hers to carry. It belonged to everyone now. She exchanged a look with Rena, a silent agreement that this was the moment to let the fine print speak for itself. Mara held up the contract, not high, not dramatic, just enough. Employees leaned closer, the room quieting in slow waves. She began reading the clause aloud, every word echoing through the lobby with the clarity of a bell rung at dawn. Elias took a step forward, then another, but stopped when he saw Lena watching him, her expression unguarded and wounded. Mara finished the final sentence. The silence that followed wasn't fear. It was awakening. The board moved faster than anyone expected. By the time Mara reached the upper floors again, the atmosphere had shifted from tension to full-blown fracture. Executives rushed past her, whispers slicing through the halls like warnings. Rena stayed close, steady as ever. When they stepped into the conference room, Elias and Carter were already there. Elias pale, Carter furious, both surrounded by board members, demanding answers they couldn't give. Mara didn't speak. She didn't have to. The contract rested in her hands like a verdict already delivered. For the first time, she saw fear on Carter's face and something almost like regret on Elias's. Almost. The truth had finally hit the walls hard enough to shake them. A board member asked Mara directly to confirm her findings. She nodded and placed the contract on the table again, sliding it forward with slow, deliberate calm. Carter snapped, accusing her of twisting their work into a weapon, but his voice cracked under its own weight. Elias leaned forward, eyes fixed on the clause, reading it again and again, as if willing the words to change. Mara explained the sequence one final time. The dates, the signatures, the compliance requirements they failed to meet. Every sentence felt like a stone dropping into a deep well. The board listened in heavy silence. When she finished, the room felt colder, clearer, impossible to salvage. Carter tried one final tactic: blame. He pointed at Elias, then at the legal team, then at the system itself, his voice rising with desperation. But the board didn't buy it. They asked him why the clause was buried, why compliance was falsified, why people were left in the dark. Mara watched the collapse unfold like a brittle structure finally giving way. Elias attempted to defend himself, but his arguments dissolved the moment he caught sight of Lena standing quietly in the doorway, her face tight with disappointment. His voice broke, and that was the moment everyone understood. Their downfall wasn't coming. It had already arrived. When the board finally spoke, their decision came like a blade slicing through months of hidden rot. Effective immediately, Carter was removed. Elias was suspended pending investigation. Their protests fell flat against the weight of evidence. Mara didn't smile. She only stepped back as the reality settled across the table. This wasn't triumph. Overdue. Necessary. Rena placed a hand on her shoulder, anchoring her in the moment she once only dreamed of surviving. The board thanked Mara formally, but she didn't absorb the words. She only felt the release of something long held inside her. Loosening at last, the room emptied slowly, the aftermath settling like dust after a long collapse. Mara stayed behind for a moment, letting the quiet wrap around her. She looked at the contract one last time, not as a weapon or shield, but as proof that truth doesn't disappear just because someone hides it. Rena urged her gently toward the hallway, reminding her there was still more to face. People to tell, systems to rebuild. As they walked out, Mara noticed Lena waiting. The girl stepped forward, voice soft but steady, thanking her. Mara nodded, feeling the weight of what that meant. This fight wasn't about revenge. It was about what comes after. And for the first time, there was a clear path ahead. The building felt different the next morning, lighter, quieter, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. Mara walked through the lobby with no contract in her hands, no weight pressing between her shoulders. Rena met her near the elevators, smiling in that tired, relieved way that comes after surviving something bigger than both of you. Mara didn't know what she'd find upstairs. She didn't know what the board wanted now that the dust had settled. But for the first time in years, she wasn't walking into a fight. She was walking into possibility. She stepped into the elevator with a steady breath, letting the moment sink into her bones. Freedom didn't feel loud. It felt like a doorway finally opening. The boardroom wasn't filled this time. Only 2 members sat at the far end of the table. Papers neatly stacked, voices gentle in a way that caught her off guard. They thanked her again, but not like before. This time there was understanding in their eyes. They told her the company needed rebuilding, transparency, leadership grounded in truth instead of power. Then they offered her a position, not out of charity, but out of respect. Mara didn't answer right away. She looked out the window at the city breathing below, thinking about everything she'd fought against, everything she'd lost, everything she'd protected. It wasn't about the job. It was about choosing who she wanted to be, now that she finally had the choice. When she stepped into the hallway again, Lena was waiting. The girl looked smaller today, not physically, but emotionally. Stripped of the defenses she carried whenever her father's shadow followed her. She apologized quietly for what she hadn't said sooner, for what she'd known and couldn't name. Mara told her she understood. Life inside someone else's fear builds its own walls. Lena nodded, eyes wet, then asked if things could change now. Mara didn't promise anything she couldn't guarantee. She simply told her that truth has a way of rebuilding what power destroys. And for the first time, Lena believed her. Later, Mara and Rena stepped outside into the cool afternoon air. The city moved around them. Cars passing, conversations drifting, life continuing as if nothing monumental had unfolded inside the tower behind them. But Mara felt the shift deep in her chest. Rena nudged her, asking what came next. Mara didn't know yet. And for once, not knowing didn't feel like fear. It felt like freedom. She looked up at the sky, clear and bright, and let the world settle without urgency. She had spent years reacting. Now, she could choose. As she walked down the sidewalk with Rena, Mara felt a strange calm settle through her. Not triumph, not relief, something steadier, something earned. She knew rebuilding wouldn't be easy. Change never is. But the weight that once pinned her down was gone. She could start over. She could help others do the same. For the first time in a long time, the road ahead didn't look like a fight. It looked like a beginning. And she walked toward it without looking back.